Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consol, your host. In addition to being the producer of this podcast and interviewing novelists, I'm a novelist myself. I've written 4 books, 3 novels, and 1 short story collection. In the episode notes, you'll find a short link to my Amazon page and all 4 of those titles. Now, on with our program. In the spotlight is Rand Walker. He is the author of more than 35 books. He's written novellas, short stories, flash fiction, microfiction, poetry. He's gone pretty much around the horn, hit for the cycle. We're going to talk about flash fiction and microfiction primarily, but I do want to talk about his poetry a little bit and a lot about his background. You know, he's worked in the magazine publishing industry. He's practiced law in Mississippi. He was the winner of the 2019 National Indie Author of the Year Award. And the big deal there is that the judges for that award are selected from Library Journal, Publishers Weekly, Ingram Spark, St. Martin's Press, and Writer's Digest. So quite an esteemed group there. He is also Associate Professor of English and Creative Writing at Hampton University and teaches with the Writer's Digest University. He lives in Virginia with his wife, Lauren, and his daughter, Zoe. And he's won a lot of awards. I cited that one award, but he's won a lot of awards. Too many to mention here. He also won an award though for the Virginia Black Film Festival for his short film titled "The Last Semester." And actually, he's at work on various film projects with an eye towards films that are around 1 minute in length. Now, talk about microfiction, talk about micro cinema. Here we go. Rand Walker, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike.
It's a pleasure. I saw some of what you teach writers, and that's the first thing that grabbed my attention was that you are a person who teach people the essential elements of writing really tight scenes for short works of fiction. Let's start with definitions here. Explain the different parameters pertaining to, say, flash fiction versus microfiction. What are the parameters there?
Well, flash fiction has a slightly longer word count. I think most editors at literary journals and editors of anthologies think of flash fiction as being around 1,000 words, or between 500 and 1,000, or maybe even up to 1,500. But microfiction, by most accounts, is around 300 words. Sometimes people stretch it to 500. But with the fewer words that you have in play, the more focused the story has to be. So I prefer to operate with very small word counts as opposed to larger word counts.
Tell us why. Why do you prefer that? Because there are people, including Mark Twain, who said basically it's harder to write short than it is to write long.
Well, I started out writing novels, and I just felt like I was saying a lot more than I wanted to say. Like I was trying to meet a word count. I mean, at times I did it effectively. Sometimes I might have not done it to the best of my ability. But I always felt like people in general say much more than they need to say. And when it comes to writing, there's no difference there. I think if we boil things down to the essence, like what is the key scene here that is actually resonating with the reader? Focus on that instead of all of these other things. I once read an author whose name I will not mention, but in the story, she had a character who spent what, 5 pages walking to the park. This was not a Teju Cole 5 pages. This was not um, a James Joyce 5 pages. This was just describing stuff that did not in any way feed the plot. It felt almost as if the person worked from an outline and they just felt the need to beef up the word count. And I said, we got to stop this. This is out of control.
Yeah, I think that's true of a lot of certainly a lot of authors out there. It does sometimes seem like there's padding going on there. They could tell the story in maybe 200 to 250 words, but they like to beef it up to 300 to 400 words. That seems to be kind of a sweet spot for the publishing industry. Uh, One of the things, let me run this past you because I started writing some short stories simply because I felt like I had more ideas that I could possibly write novels about. I had a lot of ideas I wanted to get to, and if I was trying to write a novel for each one, I'll be dead long before I got through half of them.
Yeah.
So some of it was just that, boy, there's a lot of ideas out there. There's a lot of things that I wanted to express. Does any of that play into your own decision to write short rather than spend what I would assume to be, many months or even a couple of years on a novel?
I've never actually said this aloud, but what you just said is one of the things that does cross my mind. The last book I wrote, well, not the last one, but the one before the last, it's called Apollo's Toy Box, has 300 pieces in there. And at a certain point, as I was writing this, I thought to myself, each of these could probably become its own longer form work, but I don't think I would ever get through them. So if you want to attack that idea, doing it in a very short form is one way of getting it out of your system.
So let me ask you about this day and age of social media, short attention spans. I mean, this is what we're told, and I think there's certainly validity to it. Maybe people are reading more today than ever, but what they're reading are these little snippets on social media.
Right.
I think attention spans, I think, are getting shorter because everything's moving faster, and we moved into the arenas of video and streaming series and all that. Uh, do you think that this could be, flash fiction and microfiction's day, so to speak, because people are have those short attention spans? They will opt for something, whether it's a collection of short stories or a collection of micro or flash fiction, rather than
Mhm.
sitting down to the big, 500-page tome.
Yeah, I think it's actually ironic because the shorter pieces sometimes require more time to understand than the longer pieces. So if people just looking to get into a story and out of a story, a lot of times microfiction might not necessarily be the thing that's going to get you in and out as fast as you think it will. But I think the idea of it being brief definitely appeals to the current generation. But make no mistake about it, it's always layered, and there are elements to it that require a little bit more than just a cursory read.
So you're basically conveying a story to people, and you're saying this needs to sit with them for a while. Is it because you are, and maybe not just you, but any flash fiction writer is putting information in front of them? Well, you're a poet too. So when you read poetry, you don't just walk away saying, "Hey, that was interesting." You have to
Right,
actually contemplate it. You have to
right.
you have to look through the language. You have to read between the lines. A lot of representational language there.
Yeah.
Is that part of what comes into play here? It just you have to sit with it. I mean, maybe it even creeps on you over a while. A lot of times I always really appreciate a book or a movie when I'm still thinking about it 2 weeks later.
Yes, yes, exactly. Exactly. I was talking with my brother recently about a film that I saw last month called Flow. It's an animated film where there's no dialogue and it's about a cat and a group of animals like a capybara and a dog. And they're all on this boat as the water's rising. Human civilization is long gone and they're just trying to survive the floods. But there's some things going on there in the story that even after the film was over, I was like, wow, that was really powerful. The ending to me is what seals the deal with the movie. It was a great film, but it resonated in a way that a lot of times animated films don't resonate with me.
So, when you're writing flash fiction or micro, what does it alleviate in terms of the obligations to the reader when compared with, say, short stories or novels? For example, do you need to have a beginning, middle, and end? We're always taught that that's the, basic structure.
Right.
Do you actually seek to present a beginning and a middle and an end, or do you sometimes just look at it as I'm going to create a situation, a vignette, and
Mhm.
I'm going to put it on the page, and I'm going to let it speak to people, but it's not necessarily, all it is a scene and really nothing more. And it's up to the reader to fill in some of the spaces and interpret.
Well, I think about my microfiction in particular as a conversation with the reader. There's a certain thing the reader's going to bring to it, and then there's a thing that I'm bringing to it. Every story has a beginning, middle, and end, even if it's not on the page. The biggest problem most writers have is just trying to figure out where they should start the story. All I'm doing is just starting the story closer to the most important part of the story. And when I say most important part of the story, I'm not talking about the climax, because to me, the climax is actually not the most interesting part of the story. That moment after the climax, that moment when the decision has been made to do something, and we see how that particular thing is impacting the individual. That space, that moment is what I think resonates most. So I guess, one way you could describe it as a vignette, but I'll look at it as the story is out there. I'm just showing you the most important part of it. If you read this, you already know what happened. If I'm in the room, you know I walked into the room. So I'm working in that space between what's on the page and what the reader will understand just from personal or human experiences.
I had Nancy Stoller on the program a couple of years ago. She's a flash fiction advocate. She
Oh,
teaches
yes.
courses. You know her.
Yes.
Um, and she said, just imagine writing something that you take all the boring parts out.
Right.
And I mean, that certainly has a lot of appeal to any writer and probably any reader, I would imagine. Now, when you talk about 5 pages of this gal getting to the park, walking to the
Hmm.
park, there's a bunch of connective tissue in there, and that's probably being charitable. But there's, I mean, stories are filled or novels are filled with connective tissue, and a lot of times that connective tissue really means a lot. But a lot of times it's just like what you were saying, Ran, is if the person's in the room, they obviously walked into the room. I don't have to tell people they walked in the room. You respect the reader's intelligence and their
Right.
deductive reasoning. How
Yes.
much talk about that part, respecting the reader and maybe understanding that I think maybe a lot of writing is overwritten because they're they're not really respecting the reader, understanding that a reader understands a lot more than we give him credit for.
Right. Right. There are actually a lot of books out there, and there's some writers who are much better now than they used to be. But there was at one point in Stephen King's career where he pretty much told you everything. And, he's gotten to the point where that's not the case by a long shot. I think I think of writing kind of like double dutch. So the author's throwing these ropes and the reader is, moving back and forth, trying to catch the rhythm so they can jump in there without the ropes collapsing on them. And I think the best books are the ones where the author is throwing the double dutch ropes and the reader is able to figure out what's going on, get in there, and have the best experience they could possibly have with the work. Toni Morrison was one of those writers. The first time I read one of Toni Morrison's novels, I had to start the book over a couple of times, 3 or 4 times. I'm just not getting into this. What am I missing? What am I missing? And so I read the first couple of pages, 3 or 4 times, and finally I started to see what was going on. And the moment I got it, I was locked in for the rest of the book. And I think a lot of times readers might be turned off by the fact that they have to, expend that level of effort to get into a work. But that kind of brings me around to my approach. Everything is not for everybody. I'm pretty sure people will pick up my stuff and say, hey, I don't even know what he's talking about. I don't get it. And it's okay if you don't get it because, maybe that wasn't the thing that you were supposed to get. Maybe somebody else's work was what you were supposed to get. The people I read, I'm pretty sure that they are lost on the masses, people like Cesar Ira or Anna Maria Shua or writers who don't particularly have large followings and are not really uh, committed to writing traditional literature in that regard. So, I'm not really bothered by it. But for those people who are interested or willing to challenge themselves, I welcome them. Come and check it out. It's really fun stuff.
It's interesting what you said about Toni Morrison because I've had that experience where not the same one as you. It was just I'm just not getting into it. I don't think I really have an affinity for her writing style. I'm
Hmm.
going to have to try what you did. And it reminds me, an analogous experience I had was, this is many years ago. I bought Miles Davis's album, Star People,
Okay.
and I sat down, listened to it, and it sounded like a cacophony of noise.
Hmm.
And I thought, oh man, I just spent money on this. What for? A day or two later, I went back to it and I listened again because I thought, well, let me give it a second try. I did spend money on it. I'm not going to take it
Yeah.
back to the store,
Right.
and it still sounded mostly like noise. But when I listened to it the third time,
Hmm.
there started to be separation of instruments. It started to clarify for me. And then by the time I listened to a fourth and fifth time, I was in love with the album. But
Hmm.
there was so much going on, and he was doing things that were not, that you've got to listen to more than once before you start to understand what's going on. And it really was kind of this separation of instruments that started to happen. It was
Right.
just, so much going on at the time. So it sounds very much like your experience, but in a reading format rather than a listening format.
Yeah.
Do you think in terms of character arcs? Because so often they say the characters got to evolve over time. The characters got to change. But if you're doing a 300 word microfiction piece, can you really create a character arc?
Not in the traditional sense, but you can create a moment in which the character becomes aware. Like if they were operating in this veil of ignorance, in the moment where the veil um, pulls away, you can capture that moment. Um, Let me give you an example. Have you seen the movie Rain Man? No, it was
Yes.
okay, so big fan of Rain Man, 88, Best Picture, Oscar. There was a moment because if you look at the movie and think about the character that Dustin Hoffman played, Raymond, where he's pretty much portrays a flat character throughout. He doesn't really change. The way he is at the beginning is the way he is at the end, but there is something very slight at the end that reveals the connection that he's developed with his brother Charlie. And it's where he leans his forehead against his brother's.
I
And
remember that. Yeah.
that just a little bit, just that little moment, it means nothing in the larger scope of things. I mean, and if you're just without any understanding of who he is and what he's been through, it probably means little. But if you understand that character, if you're able to get that core motivation that's there, it's being represented on the screen, then that scene, that movement is everything. So what I try to do is just figure out what is the thing that I can show to the reader that will illustrate that awareness or that click that the protagonist is having with regard to the situation that he, she, or they're in.
That's a great example. One of the things I've said to people is, when you're creating a character, all you need is a couple marks of distinction. Don't try to fill a character completely out. Two marks of distinction, maybe, and the reader's imagination materializes that person. They already have a visual about what that person looks like. So then, if you go back and you try to describe them even more, you might be messing up the reader's experience because no,
Right.
no, I already got this. It was like when they cast Robin Williams as Garp. It's like that's not Garp. He's not macho enough. I mean, I loved Robin Williams, but
Yeah.
he's just not macho enough. That was a macho wrestler who is Garp, and
Yeah.
uh, and it can happen right in the middle of reading something if all of a sudden they identify hair color or something like that. It's like no, no, no. The guy's not blonde. He's a redhead or whatever.
Right.
Another example of what you're talking about for me was when you were talking about Rain Man. There's a movie not that well known, not nearly as well known as Rain Man, but it's called Big Night, and
Mhm.
it's about two Italian brothers who start a restaurant. The one brother's in the kitchen. He's the guy who is the food perfectionist. The other guy's
Okay.
out front. He wants to commercialize the restaurant because they're not getting much business. They fight and they fight. But
Hmm.
then towards the end of the movie, very close to the end, after they had had a lot of altercations, one brother just made an omelet. He saw his brother walk in. He cut it in half, put it on a plate. They sat side by side and were eating. And the one brother reached over and just patted the other brother on the back. Like
Uh,
in the end, we're
yeah.
brothers, we're family, we're blood.
Yeah.
The fighting happens, but it's not what we're really about.
Right.
So,
Right.
um, is there any? Um, Is there any evidence that traditional publishers are showing an appetite for flash fiction or microfiction? Are the contracts that are given out, book deals, sales, anything that's showing? Not that it's all about money, because a lot of people write. It's like I actually knew a guy who said he wouldn't even show his work to anybody. It's too personal. And so
Yeah,
he wrote just for himself. But
yeah.
people do, most of us do want to get into the market and we want to make some money at it. Do you see any evidence of that, Rand? I don't know how closely you follow those kinds of numbers and such.
Well, I don't really follow it all that closely, but I know who the people are that are pioneers in this particular area, and I can kind of tell by the way their books are treated as to where they fall in that scale of advances and those things. You know, people like Lydia Davis or Diane Williams. Uh, I'm pretty sure they're not getting the same kind of offers that people who are writing novels are getting. Um,
Is this
you know,
Lydia Davis, the who was the former wife of Paul Auster?
yeah, I wouldn't I wouldn't define her by whom she was married to previously, but yeah, she's also a world-renowned translator of French and things like that. But yeah,
And is
same
she doing
person.
short fiction? And she's doing that as micro?
That's her biggest thing. She is one of the people who really made it an area to take seriously as art.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. Interesting.
Yeah.
Um, Now, Time Magazine used to teach its writers. This is back in the glory days. Okay, Time Magazine is barely alive anymore, but back in its glory days, it used to teach its writers something called compression writing. You had to pack a lot of information. Most stories ran only, unless it was the cover feature, they really only ran a page, and that's just a magazine size page. So they talked about compression writing, communicating in fewer words. Is that a phrase that says anything to you, just in terms of how do you think of? You might not use that particular phrase, compression writing, but how do you think of flash fiction or microfiction in terms of uh, getting that writing condensed to that point?
Think about minimalism. I guess you can think like the way that Hemingway wrote, he was only going to put down what was necessary there. I don't write exactly like that because I do, unlike Stephen King, believe that adverbs can be used to convey, particular points in the story. But at the same time, I'm aware that whatever word I do choose to put on the page is one that should be necessary. So if we take, for example, the 100-word story, if you have 100 words to tell a story, each one of those words has to do its work. In fact, I should get more than 100 words of effect off of the story. But what tends to happen when people first write them is they don't carefully choose the 100 words. It's like having $100 and buying something, and the overall value of it is $80. I want to take my $100 and have it valued at $200 in terms of how I use it. So that's the way I approach the language. And I think that when people are using microforms, they should, investigate their language the same way a poet would. Don't be afraid to go through and strike things out and write things in, to overwrite, to underwrite, to explore it in as many different ways as it takes to get to the core of what you're trying to do.
Now you're involved in film now, and you're talking about 1 minute films. Um, are I think of Robert Altman when he had what was a movie he did that was just a bunch of shorts. It was. Do you recall this one? It's
No, I'm not familiar with that.
it'll come to me, but basically it's just a bunch of shorts that he put together. Are you thinking in those terms that you could come up with 50 or 60 1 minute films that you turn into a compilation?
Oh, no. All right. So that's a very good question. I think what tends to happen when people operate in short forms is there's always the bigger idea of how to make it resemble, at least in terms of length, like the type of work that people are more accustomed to. So, taking 60 1-minute films to make it into a feature length film. Um, I get that, and I see the attraction in that, and I also see the business models that would work well with that. But I'm less concerned with trying to have the art consumed like that than I am just having the art consumed individually for the pieces. Now I'm saying that, but at the same time, I have these collections. I just told you about the 300 pieces in the collection. That
Hmm.
could have been three different books, but I chose to do it that way because actually Lydia Davis had a book that recently came out. She wouldn't release it through Amazon. It was only distributed through independent bookstores and bookstores like Barnes and Noble. And I realized that she had been sitting with this material for a while to accumulate that much of it. And I was like, I want to write a fat book of microfiction. And so when you've been doing as long as I have, the fat book becomes something just, let me see if I can do this. And so I wrote and wrote and wrote, and then I threw away things. And, there are 300 pieces that ended up in the book, but 500 and some change were written for the book. And so I get the desire to read them or to consume small media in larger packages. And I'm in favor of that. But at the same time, when a person watches like a 1 minute film of mine, I kind of want them to look at the film and go, wow, that was pretty good. You can watch a ton of commercials, and you probably will in the next couple of weeks with the Super Bowl. But when you get that one 30-second commercial that just really hits you, you don't have to see the other ones
Mm,
because that
good
one
point.
commercial did it for you. And that's what I'm trying to do is make sure that each of the films I do is as strong as it could possibly be so that it's the one that people remember the most.
And where would they see that film?
Well, right now I'm just sending it around to different festivals. There's a website called Film Freeway where people can upload their films to be distributed to different, film festival submission uh, queues. And that's what I've been doing. But if a person wants to see any of my films, they can go to my website, randwalker.com. There's actually in the toolbar a link that says films, and it will take you to a page that gives you the poster for the film. You can click on the poster and watch the film through the Film Freeway site. I'm not really into YouTube posting like that. Don't really need their feedback on anything, and I'm not trying to make any money off of that. So if they like to see it, that's one way of doing it. I've made it publicly viewable, so not a problem.
And to our listeners, Rand's URL, the website is in the episode notes, so you go there and click on that and check out all of his work or as much work as he's loaded up there. So it sounds to me, Rand, like to the person who's writing a novel and they're struggling, and most people, I think, get pretty tired of the book they're working on after they've been working on it for 18 or 24 months and they just want to get it done. But the
Right.
principles of flash fiction seem like they could be instructive to the person writing the novel. That let's make this much more austere. Let's
Mm,
let's let's get this thing to lose some weight. Let's
hmm.
firm it up. What was
Yeah.
the term you used? You used a phrase or a word that had to do with just really making it taut. Um, I would think that I mean along those lines that you were saying earlier about overwritten novels, and I when I haven't read a ton of Stephen King, but that's one of my criticisms of Stephen King is a lot of his stuff's really overwritten and a lot of pop culture references
Hmm.
that are really time dependent.
Yeah.
They're not going to stand the test of time when it's like, what the heck is that? It's too immediate. It's just too immediate.
Right.
So, but to that point, I'm wondering, you're an instructor. I'm wondering if
Hmm.
you have had experiences where it's like, I definitely want to write novels. They don't have to be long novels, but I like the idea of using flash fiction principles in
Hmm.
producing it.
Right. Well, there's some novels out there right now that are using flash fiction as the core of their structure. There was one, what's it called? Black Cake by was it Charlene? Oh my goodness, I'm actually not looking at the book right now. Wilkerson is her last name. I think it's called Black Cake. I think they did an adaptation of a film or a TV show on Hulu for it. But each of the chapters is fewer than 1,500 words. Uh, she's very skilled in that area. And over in Bath, England, they have a competition for novellas in Flash, where people construct a novella using these different components of flash fiction stories. So there are a lot of people out there already experimenting with that. I know Jenny Offill's book, The Speculation Department, uses the same kind of structure. So there's some people out there who are actually able to get complete novels done with the flash fiction structure as the bones of the entire novel.
Hmm. Hmm. What do you do in terms of character development? If you have a key character, maybe a story maybe only has one character, maybe a couple, but here's your key character. How do you think in terms of creating a character? So often we hear about novelists that the critics will say it's just a bunch of cardboard characters, or the
Mhm.
characters are underdeveloped. What's your approach on that when you have a key character in a piece?
Okay, so some of my pieces are very, very brief. I have pieces that can be as short as 11 words, and I have some that can be as long as 300 words. So it really depends. I'll look kind of at the situation and think about, how would a person, because I'm not really at the point in my writing life where I spend a lot of time focusing on characters. When I first started writing as a novelist, that was all I obsessed about. I did, the sheets where I'm going through how old is your character, where's your character work, their dislikes, the likes, favorite foods, are they allergic to things, favorite colors. I did all of that stuff when I first started. And as I began to work from the novel to the novella and eventually to short stories and finally to microfiction, I started thinking of my characters as kind of like an every person character. And in doing that, I get to focus more on the character as a part of the milieu of what's around them and not just where everything serves it. So we're showing the universe as opposed to saying, hey, this is the earth and we are the center of everything. Like, no, we are a part of everything.
Hmm. Hmm. How did you get started writing? You're obviously really into this thing. You're obviously into communication and it will be between you're into motion pictures. You've obviously loved to write and have been doing it for quite a while. When did you figure out that you wanted to write?
I'm pretty sure, like other writers, you were a person who was sitting there writing things on a sheet of paper and then folding it in half or in quarters and then putting 25 cents on the outside and walking up to your parents and saying, hey, you want to buy my book? I think a lot of writers started out that way. I think the first story I ever had, well, I had a poem that won a competition when I was in the sixth grade. But when I got to high school, I wrote a story that was published by the local newspaper around Halloween. And I was surprised when one of my classmates kept coming up to me like, man, that was so good. What was going on there? Are you doing a sequel? And all that kind of stuff. And I was like, it's just fun. My mother never denied me books when I was growing up. It's because when she and my father were in college, they just read, they were always reading. So when we came along, they would always buy us books. And I was, the 10, 11-year-old kid saying, hey, can I get the Tommy Knockers by Stephen King? And my mother was not one to say, well, you're too young for Stephen King. If you want to read it, if you want to find out what's in the book, then yeah, here we go. So they never banned anything from our house. We just read whatever we wanted to read. And you start to develop your own sense of what you like and what you don't like and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense to you. And while I was in high school, I picked up Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. And
Hmm.
this was right before the movie came out. So I'm giving my age away. And while I was reading that book, I was like, oh my goodness, the science is so good. This is so interesting. I think I'll go and be a major in biology. And that's one of the things that's kind of funny. If a writer's doing their job, they will make you feel like you're smarter than you are. So I got to college and actually took a biology class for majors, not for art people. And I realized that Michael Crichton didn't write the textbooks. So it was a whole different thing. I majored in English. I enjoyed it a lot, but I still wasn't completely committed to writing. I was just writing because it was fun. It was something that I enjoyed doing. I would take the classes. Sometimes you were trying to impress people in the classes, but it was never anything serious, serious. But when I graduated from college, I went to a program at NYU in publishing. It was a publishing program. And while I was there, got a chance to read a lot of books because every editor, every agent, everybody who visited the course brought with them these goodies. And so I spent the whole summer reading and just got addicted all over again. And I started thinking about it from a business standpoint. And as a part of trying to keep with the whole business, I don't know, I'm giving you a really long answer to your question,
That's
but
fine.
I ended up going to law school to learn about intellectual property and all of those different things to help set up a company to do things. And tried to go back to New York to get back into media, but didn't really work out that way. So I took the bar, moved to Mississippi, and started practicing law, which I did not like. And I practiced for 2 years, and I decided, you know what? Life is too short. These student loan people, they cannot get blood from a turnip. So I went ahead and just walked away, but I didn't have anything planned to do. I was just an unemployed person with a license to practice law. And during that window, I started reading and writing. And this time when I was writing with a fire that was building inside of me. So I reached back out to one of the literary agents that I met when I was in New York. She thought what I was doing was pretty good, and that gave me all of the confidence I needed to go forward from there. And so I've been writing pretty much nonstop in a very serious way since about 2004.
Hmm.
And over that time, I've seen a little bit of everything. And I've dealt with a little bit of everything. And I think I finally found the type of writing and the way I want my words to reach the world that will lay the foundation for any legacy I plan to have in this.
So, the turning point for you was, quitting law, catching the writing fever. I
Yes.
suspect there was another turning point along the way. Um, what would you identify? I mean, that there's one. Was there another turning point that was a breakthrough for you?
Yes. All right. So I've been writing books and putting them out um, after things fell through with my literary agent and the publishers that we were in talks with. I was just, self-publishing my work. And something happened after the 16th book I put out. I submitted it to a competition and it was just, a Hail Mary. It was free to apply, didn't cost me anything. I submitted it and just went about my business. Actually forgotten that I had uploaded the book for consideration. And then I got an email in December of that year that my book had won the Virginia Indie Author Book Award. And I was pretty surprised. And at first I was like, nah, they're trying to trick me. This is like some Nigerian prince needs money out of the bank and all of that. And had to go back and check my emails to see that I actually applied to this thing. And I was like, okay, so is this legit? And they sent me the check and I cashed the check. And I was like, this is legit. And then I was like, okay, so that's some validation right there. And then about a month or two later, I get an email from the same organization, and they tell me that they've decided to take all the people who won the awards for the various states and to do like a battle royal and select one national indie award winner out of all of them. And I was like, I'm lucky just to even get the Virginia one. So I'm not even gonna, I didn't even look at what the prize consisted of because I'm like, I'm not gonna get it. So and I didn't have to apply for it because they automatically rolled my application into this other thing. And I promptly forgot about it. And then in March of the year, I was in the middle of teaching class and I got an email saying that I won the award. And only then did I look at what that entailed. And I was like, oh my goodness. And that day forward, everything changed. The relationships I've developed over the years, the people I've had the pleasure of working with. The fact that you and I are talking right now is a byproduct of Writer's Digest, and I met them through the award. My entire writing life just changed, and it gave me a couple of things. It gave me a chance to get my words out to a larger audience, but it also gave me the freedom to actually try to experiment with what I really wanted to do as a writer. So almost as soon as I won the award, I shifted gears to microfiction, which is the total opposite of what I probably would have done if I'd been someone else. If you win an award for a novel, then you should write more novels. And I promptly stopped writing novels the moment I won the award and committed myself wholeheartedly to writing microfiction.
Mm. Now, along the way, you said that things fell through with your agent.
Hmm.
Can you talk about that? I'm not asking for a name, but just what was
Oh, sure. I
the,
can tell you. I can tell
yeah.
you. So I'd written the book and it got sent out to one of the publishers, the big five publishers. Actually, it got sent out to several within the big fives. Two people were interested in it, and I would have loved to have been published by either one of these. One said that the salacious parts of the novel were not salacious enough. So they wanted me to make it into something a little bit more gratuitous with certain things, which I felt was not really the point of the story. But wanting to get published, I did make some of those changes. The only problem was my agent did not send the changes back to that particular publisher. So it kind of just dissipated. Then there was a time I was going to the other publisher, and actually there were two more publishers. So with the second publisher, they read the first 60 pages, loved it, could not stop reading it, and they sent it out to different readers outside of the company just to get a feel for it because I was writing things that would probably be targeted more to an African American female market. And there was this confusing consensus that Black women did not want to read fiction written by Black men, which still to me doesn't make any sense.
Mm.
And so they decided not to move ahead with it. The final situation with a big five was when I took my book to this particular publisher. The associate editor, who actually attended the same college I did, loved the book, wanted to move forward with it, but his editor got chopped, and that took the entire wing of the editorial department with them. And the project died like that.
Uh,
And I just got tired of my book being at the whim of everyone else. And I said,
mhm.
I'm going to write a book strictly to publish myself. And then I then double back around and publish that first book. But I got tired of not having any control over what I was doing. And I'd already gone to law school and I studied business. And, setting up a publishing company is not the most challenging thing in the world. I was like, okay, so this is what I have to do. Okay, let's do it. And I haven't looked back since then.
How long does it take you? You could, let's say you're going to write a 300 word microfiction piece. Uh, I mean, what's the time range on average that you would spend putting that together? Are these pretty, they must be written fairly bebop in some cases. I mean, are you able to kick them out pretty good? Or do you find that you're spending, you know, a month or two or three on them?
It depends. It's kind of like poetry. When I was writing actual novels, I just sat my behind in the seat and just did the work. But when you're writing pieces like this, you have to kind of have the inspiration hit you some kind of way. So there's some days where I don't write anything. There might be a week or two where I don't write anything. And then there might be one day where I write, three or four pieces. So I don't know what the creative process is for like people like what Miles would do. But one thing, you had mentioned Miles earlier, and there's something that I found fascinating about him as an artist. He didn't really care what people thought when he was creating. He was going to do what he was going to do. And when he performed on stage, oftentimes he would turn his back to the audience and play to the people on stage with him. He was in conversation with them, not in conversation necessarily with the crowd. If you were in the crowd, you were given the luxury of being able to see him communicate his art to other musicians. But make no mistake about it, he was not up there tap dancing for anybody. And so I think about that when I approach my own art. I'm not trying to play to the masses with this. Um, I would love for someone to come along and read a piece and say, you know what? I see how this is connected to this thing, and how this thing is connected to that thing. But, honestly, I expect most readers will only get part of what I talk about, and that's okay. Maybe the writer for whom I'm writing these things hasn't even been born yet. And if that's the case, I'm cool with that as well.
I've heard that story about Miles Davis playing, yeah, to the band and with back to the audience,
Yeah,
and that's pretty cool stuff. You hit at something that is really, I think, a big problem among people who are out there writing and trying to be commercially successful, that they spend so much time thinking about the audience or the market that they're
right,
not really writing what's at their core. They're not writing
right,
what they really
right.
want. I had a guy on
Exactly.
the program, I think his name's Bill Knauer, and he talked about fearless writing. And I think
Mm,
writing brings a lot of fear with it to so many of us because we're thinking about the market and how it's going to play with a particular reader, and and it's just the opposite of what Miles Davis was doing. This
right,
is what I feel. This is what I'm going to play, and I'm doing it for me. And if there are people who come along, that's great. Obviously, there are a lot of people who came along.
right. Now, I love that. Just writing fearlessly. At this point, I don't really have anything to lose with it. I teach this, I evangelize for it. I've been given opportunities to write about it for different publications and speak about it at conferences. Is it ever going to make, the kind of money that Stephen King makes? No, it's not. But I think it's a lot more rewarding being able to do something that at my core makes me happy. And that's pretty much all I'm focused on.
So you made the decision to go to microfiction, and how has your writing changed over the years? I mean, once you made
Ooh,
that decision, how has it
wow.
changed? And
Um,
maybe even anticipate how you expect it to change as you age.
mhm. One of the things that happened is I started thinking differently. I started trying to get to the core of things faster. I started to actually investigate language more. Um, I was thinking, like, what would the next 25, 30 years of my writing look like? You know, it's like, all right, Marc Chagall, he had been doing art for 80 years because I think he died in his 90s. And on the day he died, he went to the studio, he came home, he ate his meal, he sat in his chair, and then just expired. And I think that there's something beautiful to that because he was still working up till he died. No telling how many times he changed. If we look at these jazz artists, you have this period. You got bebop, you got cool, you got all these different types of jazz. And if you take a single artist, they go through their own movements. Like, oh, this is Miles when he's entering into his electric phase, or this is him when he's going into this phase. And as a writer, you have to be open to be able to evolve like that. If I had actually gotten that original book published, I would probably still be writing romantic comedies. But now
Mhm.
I can write whatever I want, however I want. And you know, I don't really think that there's anyone sitting around saying like, "Oh, we need another guy to do this." So I get to carve my own lane, run my own race, and define my art as I see fit. This is where I want my contributions to be. I think the novels that I wrote were fun. They were good. One of them got translated and published by a French publisher. And I really do appreciate, the friendships I developed from those books. But at the end of the day, I'm more focused on the small things.
Mhm.
Just,
Mhm.
I can write a story about a definition of a word. And I don't have to think
Right.
about, oh, does that have, is there rising action? Is there an inciting incident? I don't have to think about that. All I have to think is, I can convey, like if I had two definitions on a page and I had a sample sentence using the word, and I happened to have those two sample sentences speak against each other in a way that shows kind of the conflict of the language, it also implies a lot of other things at the same time. And I love experimenting with things like that. Like, have you ever read a story where it's just a receipt? Yeah,
Just a
like
receipt.
just a receipt. I have a story that's just a receipt. And it does require that the reader engage with the material, but it's all there on the page. All the things that you want in a story is all there. You just have to supply part of it. I'm giving you a piece of it, and then you give me the other piece of it, and there we have it. Something
Well, that
beautiful.
reminds me of the short story, maybe the shortest story ever written. It's attributed to Hemingway, but they're not really sure if he wrote it.
No, he didn't, but it's all right.
Yeah, but it was brilliant. Just for
Yeah,
sale, baby shoes, never been worn.
right,
And
right,
I was actually with some people where we did a little thought experiment. I actually was an instructor in a class and said, what is going on here? And it was amazing how many different takes on it there were. Yeah,
right.
the interpretations are many of them. But you talk about microfiction. I mean that was so short, probably doesn't even qualify. But it just
Yeah,
shows that if you pick the right words or you just set the elements in place, that a
mhm,
lot can be derived from it.
right. You know what's funny? And I'm going to give you a story that is not apocryphal in nature. It's one called The Dinosaur by Augusto Monterosso. And it's like 11 words, or maybe it's 9 words. It's written in Spanish, so I'm going to just give an English translation. When she awoke, the dinosaur was still there. That's the entire story. And that's a real story written by a real person. We take a lot of things and say, "Oh, did you know that Hemingway used to write standing up?" No, he didn't. He used to do this and he did that, and it was a bet. No, that came from a headline from a newspaper, but it's okay. Sometimes we need those mythologies to help inspire us. But I
Sure.
think when we forget that they're mythologies is where, it seems like something that a real human being can't do because it's elevated to that level. But there are people out there doing this every day. Smith College has the 6 word story uh, journal that they do. So you don't have to be special to write microfiction. I guess that's the point I'm trying to hammer home. And it's wonderful that people can have multiple interpretations from the same set of words. Um, but at the same time, if I was going to put a Mount Rushmore of microfictionists together, all due respect to Papa, he's not really a microfictionist in that regard.
No, no, definitely not. Um, but he did bring to it the was really just the short declarative sentences, tell the story. And also Ray Carver, I remember somebody had said, I love that quote. They said that it was Ray Carver and somebody else that they let the facts just blaze on the page. It's
Oh
just,
yeah.
they're not making it. They're not. There's not a lot of ornamentation. It's just the
Hmm.
facts blazed on the page. When they're properly constructed, they really communicate in a significant way. I mean, we still read Hemingway big these days. So,
Yeah. But
did
that's
it? Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I was
No,
going to
finish
say
that
that
thought.
one of the things there is like the minimal writing versus the microfiction are actually two different things. Like what Carver did with his sentences, what Hemingway did with their sentences, is that minimalism is a specific type of writing,
Mm.
whereas with microfiction, it doesn't necessarily have to include minimalism in it, but the stories are just generally shorter. But you mentioning Carver made me think about the story that he wrote where well, I don't want to spoil too many things, but Carver's been out there for quite a while at this point. I'm pretty sure most of your listeners have read Carver,
Mm.
where the father and the mother are having a tug of war with the baby.
God, I'm trying to remember that one. I don't specifically remember it, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, I don't want to give it away, but that haunting images. I think most of the time when we talk about Carver, we're thinking about him, where the protagonist is engaging with the blind guy who used to where his wife used to work for the blind guy and all of that. But there's some haunting images out there. And I think to me, one of the things that makes work interesting, like you said earlier, is when it's resonant. And for me, sometimes those haunting images are the things that I lock in on. and try to replicate in my own work, even if it comes from a person who does not necessarily write in my particular form.
Hmm. Now, you remember it was, I don't know how many years ago now, but 10th of December by George Saunders. It's number one on the New York Times bestseller list, and it's a
Right,
collection of short stories,
right.
which open a lot of eyes that, are we, have things swung back around? Publishers tend not to like short story collections unless you're already somebody who's famous.
Right, right.
But that was a big deal. And it
Hmm.
wasn't easy reading. It was pretty experimental. And I remember I've only done this with one other book, I think, but I had bought the book. I'm reading it. I'm struggling with it. And I went to Audible and got the audio edition and I listened and read simultaneously. And that was a big help,
Okay.
partly because George Saunders did the reading. So he knew exactly where he wanted the nuances, the inflections, and it
Right.
was a really good experience to pay double for it, but it was worth it for the read.
Yeah.
Did that nail you in any way when you saw that here's a short story collection that wow, it hit number one?
Actually, I'm going to be honest with you. I think the publishing industry tends to anoint certain individuals. So George Saunders is going to be that short story writer of our generation. That's
Mm.
what he does. There, several people who've been primarily short story writers, but even he caved and wrote a novel.
Yep.
So, um, some people are going to be able to benefit from the system as it stands, and he's one of the beneficiaries of it. Now, is he worthy of it? Yes, he's very much worthy of it. He's a person who lived a very full life before he even got down to writing. So, I love his approach to writing. I think that he's a wonderful, amazing writer. But I do think that in the publishing industry, there's only room for so many people to make that kind of career with that particular form.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. So, let me ask you about your writing regimen. Now, you've already established that you're not necessarily a guy. You're not. Hey, alarm goes up at 6:30. I'm sitting down with a cup of coffee. I write for 4 hours every morning. That's not your style.
No.
But when you do sit down to write, talk a little bit about that. Are you the kind of person who wants to be in the same place every time, or do you like to go on the move? What kind of time do you spend, and how variable is it all?
You know what's funny is I do far more journaling than I actually do writing. I think, and I journal longhand. So I have my pen, I have my notebook. I take it everywhere I go. I'm constantly writing. I will be at my daughter's swim practice and they know I'm the parent who's going to have a notebook and a pen. And I'm jotting things down and occasionally getting ideas. So what I do is I think that kind of makes my brain fertile for creativity. And then when I sit down at the computer, like say 9 o'clock at night, I sit down, open up a file and put on some jazz. I do listen to quite a bit of jazz when I'm writing. And then just write the first interesting thing that comes to mind and just see where it goes from there. And sometimes I'm successful with it, sometimes I'm not. Other times, if I have a dream and I wake up and I jot down key things from the dream into my phone, I'll look at it later and see if it makes sense or just see if I was just really high from the dream that I had.
Hmm.
But the ideas kind of come from everywhere. Sometimes I'm looking for an idea and I will just fan through the dictionary. And what's the most interesting word my finger stops on? Let's see if we can use that as the inspiration for a story. So stories come from everywhere. And the thing is just to be open to whatever the story is whenever it hits you. So there's no really routine about it other than just journaling and just walking around being open to possibilities of ideas.
So you're journaling. I mean, are you the kind of guy who might be, go to a cocktail party and you come back home and the journaling is really about the experience of the cocktail party, and maybe you end up with a character that in the course of journaling that you decide, I think that's usable. I'm going to do something with that, or try to do something with that.
Most of the time when I'm journaling about the writing process or
Mm.
about what I'm thinking in the moment. Never really about the stories. Like I can talk about, oh, I need to write 5 stories this week. I need to do this. Maybe I'll read some Lydia Davis. Maybe I'll read some Diane Williams. Maybe I'll read some John Edgar Wiseman or something like that. And I can write all of this stuff down, and none of it actually goes into the story itself. When I sit down to write the story, it's like whatever has been simmering in my subconscious, it's given a chance to roam free. But normally the ideas for the stories do not start out in the journals.
Gotcha. So when you do write, when you are writing, with the idea that I'm hoping to this becomes a piece. Well, let me give you a comparison. There's Tom Robbins who says a good day of writing is one paragraph, but he says, but I
Hmm.
hone that thing. When I'm done
Yeah,
with that paragraph, it's done and it does not need, I do all the rewriting and
yeah,
rethinking and rewriting on that paragraph that day.
yeah,
Very slow, methodical way to put a novel together, but he does it.
right.
Versus somebody who, like a Julia Cameron, who preaches the morning pages. Well, that the morning pages are really just kind of tilling the soil, but
Hmm.
laying track. She talks about producing a lot of copy and then throwing away. And there's other people who ascribe to this, letting your subconscious mind go. Just keep writing. Don't edit. Don't worry about how it comes out. Then it's almost like panning for gold. Then you sift through it and you keep
Hmm.
the jewels, and the rest of it's
Right.
just dross, and it
Yeah.
goes in the circular file. Is your style either one of those or somewhere in between?
A little bit closer to the former. The style that you were describing that Tom Robbins uses is the same style that Cesar Ira, the Argentine writer, uses.
Hmm.
He writes that one perfect page, and then he goes to the next day and does the same thing. But the thing is he never goes back and edits. So as he gets farther and farther into his book, sometimes things kind of go off kilter and absurdity rears its ugly head into the story, which actually makes it quite interesting to read. Um, but when I'm writing that day, I'm putting on the page what I consider to be the best version of the story. But I do understand that the me tomorrow might be different than the me today. And you can get into that whole Oscar Wilde thing where I spent the whole morning deciding to take out the comma and the whole afternoon adding it back in. Uh, and it happens.
Yeah.
So sometimes today it feels one way, and then tomorrow it feels a different way. And when I'm actually, doing final edits for like a collection or something like that, I will reread the piece and see how it feels in my mouth. Like, am I still connected to the language the way I was when I wrote it? Because if I'm not, something's got to change. Because we're going to publish the most recent version of that idea, not the original version of it. So, I'm trying to perfect it in the first go round, but I'm giving myself space to evolve as a writer in the meantime with the edits.
Is there, not to get esoteric, but when your writing is working for you, where does it come from? I mean, do you feel that you channel at all? Do you believe in a metaphysical dimension? Do you believe in a that you can actually channel? Not that you're consciously doing it, but
Hmm.
there are many people who say that, when you put the work in, things just start to happen. And I've even heard some people, it hasn't happened to me, but I've heard some people say, a good day of writing, I'm kind of reading it off the page rather than thinking about it. It's just my fingers are moving and I'm reading it.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty rare. But what about that? Is there anything celestial, metaphysical, channeled, anything like that that works for you, or is it straight? Hey, it's just the gray matter, and some days the synapses are firing just right.
I'm going to take the whole metaphysical idea in a different direction. I'm a person who believes the most valuable asset that any person has is time. And I was able to break free of spending my life practicing law. And since I don't have that burden to carry with me, that means every time I'm breathing and I have the faculties of my brain, I have a chance to create something. And so I'm actually at this point in a race against time. I don't know how long I'm going to live. I might live to be 115, or I might live to be, a couple of years older than I am now. I don't know. but I want to get as much in me out onto the page, out into the world as I can. Now, is that like coming from some other place? Um, I just kind of think that we're all full of experiences. And if you're aware of what's going on around you and you're able to ask the question why, or even better yet, what if, then you would really never run out of ideas. So that's to me a kind of a human thing, a gray matter thing. But at the same time, the larger thing is trying to find ways of maximizing the time that I'm given to do this particular art.
Mhm. My guest has been Rand Walker, advocate for flash fiction, microfiction, poetry. He's written them all, more than 35 books. The URL is in the episode notes, so you can go to his website and see the full breadth of his work. He's getting into film. He's also an instructor. He teaches at a couple different places, Writer's Digest University, and I said it earlier. Where are you teaching as an instructor? What school was that, Rand?
I'm an associate professor of creative writing at Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia.
Gotcha. There it is. Really thoughtful stuff, Rand. Thank you so much for coming on the program. I this was eye-opening, so really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Mike.